My name is Douglas Van Dyke. I will be reading an excerpt from the first book in the Pilgrims with Blades series called Pressed into Service. Now, the Pilgrims with Blades series is going to be a series of adventures, partly inspired by Robert E. Howard's Conan series, except it will revolve around five main characters and the struggles they have together, but as well as their differences. So I'm going to read a little bit from the first book here. This is from the prologue of the book. It is divided into some section breaks as there are different perspectives within it, so I will mention the section break when they occur. Volume 1, Prologue, The Five Nightmares. In his dream, the dwarf was actually a giant. His strides covered miles at a time, stretching across fiefdoms and cities with each step. His boots could cross deep ocean waters without passing his knee. The realm of Dale Laral lay before him like a miniature model. A quick step from home, and he overlooked Orlan, the city of spires. Full of cultures and a mix of races, it bustled with the markets of trade. Yet for all its riches, it didn't offer the welcome he would need. Turning to the east, he slogged through the sea channels to a new land. He looked upon the entirety of the unexplored Waldarian continent. The ancient trees scratched and tore through his leggings. He would not find what he needed there. He felt the familiar twinge of desperation. Thus he marched across more seas, continents, and countries. The counties of Diara, the Republic of Lar, the Commonwealth of Juto, each one offered naught. What he needed was missing. His need drove him to search farther. The continent of Sri Kaya offered hope. There was a glimpse of mountains and warm hearths within. From mountains to shorelines, the tiny people he saw fought savagely with one another. One side consisted of those of his race. He thought he would find a welcome, but they rebuked anyone who was not of their clans. "No outsiders," they growled. The journey had already taken too long. His legs could barely carry him. Wearily, he trudged back to the halls of his clan. Failure weighed on him. His kin would console and support him for a search, but his failure to find a solution doomed them all. His steps shortened, and in the dream his form steadily shrank toward a normal height. The miles to his bed, once covered in a single step, required a grueling march. Worry beset him. His pace picked up into a run. His ordeal ended in stumbling steps as he finally knocked on the doors of his home. Shock struck him as he realized the journey had taken too long. His home stood empty, his family gone. Section break, next nightmare. She looked to the sky, but the sun refused to shine. The darkness surrounded her, cloaked her within a cold embrace. Despite the blackness, those eyes still watched her. They weren't normal eyes. Orbs, dried and withered long past their mortal life, watched her every move. She could move away from them, but never be free of them. They were the sentries of a prison without walls. Sometimes she moved close to the boundary. Freedom seemed so enticingly close. Yet the eyes silently watched her, daring her. Suddenly, the controlling, pitch-black eyes called from the center of the prison. "I see you, and you are mine. Bring me what I need, or stand in its place." With no choice, she hunted the animal. It had been beautiful, wild, and free, but now dead by her hands. She trudged it to the master. He took it from her and bent its form. His will forced her to submit to her part in the transformation. He drew blood from her arm, using it for his magic. She witnessed the horror while enduring terror. The ceremony bestowed the creature the false life of an abomination, its eyes dulled like the cold orbs of the other centuries. She had no doubt the same terror would one day befall her. Once he concluded his rite, he returned her to the darkness. She would endure no more. The way is open, she convinced herself. Others worried for her safety, the living war mice with whom she shared the prison. She could not afford to lead them out as well. She had a feeling she would fail, and she would not have them suffer as she might. She ran for the wall-less boundary. There were gaps between the watching orbs, practically daring her to escape, so she sprinted for it. When she got to the space between them, her body jerked to a stop. Invisible lines anchored her to the master. All she could do was scream and struggle, caught in the web. Section break. Next nightmare. He walked through the halls of his family's castle, looking through the eyes of his youth. His child legs ran playfully through stone halls of trophies and tapestries. The trimmings and decorations advertised his family's wealth. The halls stretched longer and chambers loomed larger than he recalled. But in his heart, he still knew this was home. Where were his brother and sister? Where was his family? In a large chamber, he came to the throne overlooking the long dining table. It could easily host a score of guests, and often did. He moved towards it until a trophy, a boar's head mounted on the wall, looked right at him and arrested his movement. It seemed to glare at him. He turned, only to find another trophy watching him. This one stood as a full bear, but looked down on him as if ready to lay its claws on him. Even tapestry figures turned and stared at him. "You don't belong here," a voice spoke. The child turned, seeing a stranger sitting tall and confident upon his father's throne. No one had been sitting there a moment ago, and he couldn't clearly see the face. "Get out of my castle, or I'll arrest you." Scared, he turned to run. This was his home. Where was his family? What happened to their servants? The stranger behind him began shouting for the guards. More shouting. Thundering steps in the distance, approaching fast. Scared, he began running for the nearest exit, yet he had trouble remembering exactly where to find it. He should know where the exit was, but every new room reminded him that it was at least one room farther. Armored boots clamored in chase. Hallways stretched and one junction led to another. He couldn't find the door. The guard stamped closer, but he couldn't escape. Section break. Next nightmare. Laughter and good conversation surrounded the dreamer, as he enjoyed drinking the night away with his closest friends. He picked away a string of meat dangling from one of his tusks as he looked about the room through red eyes, physical traits he shared with everyone present. Their revelry this night would not be out of place among any race in the realm of Dale-Laral. A grand pavilion tent, made of stitched-together hides and supported by thick beams of wood, sheltered the party-goers as they danced around a bonfire. The tent stretched far enough that 100 people could have slept within its warm embrace. Smoke from the bonfire flowed like mist around the occupants, before spiraling up through a hole near the center. Fur beds around the edges left revelers a place to rest. Many patrons gathered around a wall of kegs stacked to the ceiling. The crowd freely passed drinks around, one of which made its way to the dreamer. Caught up in the carousing, he danced his body through the crowd, heedless of the foam spilling over the rim. "Good times as you ever see," a friend clapped him on the shoulder. He turned to agree, but stopped stiff with shock. A known friend stood there, laughing, a drink in one hand, patting him on the back with the other. Oddly enough, the friend also had an arrow stuck in his chest. Unsure exactly how to react, he simply nodded and turned away. As long as his friend didn't mind the arrow, there was no need to break the mood of the moment. He moved into the crowd, joining several other friends in the words of a song. One friend danced and appeared to sing, but the gash across his throat prevented the words from taking shape. Blood crusted the wound, but the reveler continued to clap hands and mouth the words. The dreamer's own song faltered as he witnessed the stricken dancer carry on. Another called out, "You'll join us, won't you?" He turned to the newest speaker. This friend, holding out a spare mug, while standing amongst his own spilled entrails, said, "Your place is here." Everyone standing around the speaker displayed mortal wounds. None seemed bothered by it, and the party continued dancing and singing. The guests ignored their gashes, injuries, and escaping blood. More than one tried to put a hand out to him, offering him drinks. He forced a friendly smile and turned away. Pretending nothing was amiss, he tried to put distance between himself and those stricken. He couldn't see any exits to the tent. He joined the singing just to calm his nerves as he pushed past more and more wounded friends looking for an escape. Every one of his friends should have been dead and buried. His song stuttered in nervous desperation as he tried pushing the hides at the side of the tent. Others kept laying hands on him, trying to pull him back. "You belong with us," they insisted. Section break. New nightmare. She looked up through the towering trees. A slight gap allowed the sun's rays to bask the forest floor upon which she stood. The sunlight silently invited her to reach up to it. She wanted to escape her grounded world, to fly in the wind alongside birds. A sudden fancy compelled her to try. She spread her arms, closed her eyes, and wished to touch the sky. The wind wrapped about her, blowing her hair and making her feel weightless within her flapping robes. The ground fell away from her toes. She didn't open her eyes until a couple breaths had passed. She was flying, arms still outstretched. Her body glided over the tops of the trees. Birds scattered, swarming about the sky around her. Her vision swept over her home city, looking at her neighbors as they looked back up at her. A smile split her face as her laughter echoed below. In contrast, she noticed her people seemed scared. They pointed at the sky wearing frightened faces. Children screamed and ran. Guards rang alarm bells. People shouted to her, but the wind took their words. Were they warning her? She looked about, finally spotting something that struck terror to her core. She saw a shadow cast across the trees below, large and malformed. The monstrous outline, hideous and fast, paced her. Fear kept her from looking up to see the owner. The birds weren't flocking for her, they were fleeing the creature. Similarly, her people fled the open clearings and ran for cover. She tried to fly evasively. Her path veered left and right to avoid being an easy target. The shadow just grew larger, matching every movement. She couldn't even see her own slim shadow in order to gauge the distance. The horrible truth dawned. The beastly shadow belonged to her.